This is the primal scream of a dying regime.
Pray for our enemies, because we're going medieval on these people. You're just not got a free shot on all these networks lying about the people. The people have had a belly full of it. I know you don't like hearing that. I know you try to do everything in the world to stop that, but you're not going to stop it. It's going to happen.
And where do people like that go to share the big lie? MAGA media. I wish in my soul, I wish that any of these people had a conscience.
Ask yourself, what is my task and what is my purpose? If that answer is to save my country, this country will be saved.
War Room. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Wednesday, 8 July, Year of Our Lord 2026. There's so much going on. The NATO conference is over. I think President's heading back. Pretty fiery. At one moment, very accommodating for NATO, saying they had a great dinner, great meeting, a lot of unity. And then on the other hand, putting certain NATO members on blast, putting NATO sometimes on blast. This whole situation between Turkey and Israel. Israel kind of challenging President Trump on his association with Erdogan and Turkey and what Turkey means for what they intend to do in Gaza and other things. So very, very, very intense today. Also, President Trump said, "Hey, look, I've tried negotiating. I've tried understanding. My whole goal is denuclearization. That the mullahs and the Ayatollah and his followers can't have control, can't have their finger on a button of a nuclear weapon." Now, he did go and reinforce what we said. He's obliterated the nuclear program, but he said that's his number one concern. And we're back in it as of tonight. I think tonight could even be more intense. So we'll have to find out about that. But right now, he's given CENTCOM, and I think CENTCOM's just sent out a notice here moments ago about revving this thing up. Wendy Patrick joins us now. Wendy, this is a very truncated session today and normally in federal courts, Wednesday's a day, if they're in trial, they do break to do what they call court business. All the other trials they're trying to juggle because these people have massive caseloads. Can you get us up to date? What's your assessment of what we've seen so far, and what do you anticipate for the rest of the day?
What we've seen so far is attempting to get into the statements from Mr. Robinson, the statements from Robinson's roommate. But that has hit a snag in the sense that procedurally, there was apparently a lack of meeting of the minds about how we were going to get into this evidence and what was going to be admissible. So there's been a request to hear more information and more evidence from what the roommate Lance Twigg said to investigators. Remember, this is important because this is the person to whom Mr. Robinson allegedly not only admitted his intention to commit the crime, but afterwards that he did. This is important because thus far we've set the scene, we've connected the dots in terms of forensics, ballistics, DNA, video evidence, but we're now getting into the real meat of the case, which is what did the defendant say he did with respect to Mr. Robinson? Now, for the very first time also, Steve, I've noticed a little bit of the judge getting a little antsy that maybe there are unanticipated delays that he wants to avoid. Because remember what he said at the beginning of the afternoon. This case, this prelim, will be completed by Friday at 5 p.m. Are both sides okay with that? They both said yes. And then here we go, right out of the gate, we have this big procedural hurdle. But you know what, Steve? They're going to work it out. They're going to talk behind the scenes that they have to, and they're going to re-hit the ground running. Because as you notice, the court has other business today.
But hang on a second. This is what I was saying yesterday. And look, I'm no professional. I'm watching it and following you and others. Given there's 7 charges, it's a capital murder case, and they're asking for the death penalty. It seemed even yesterday, with all the objections and everything, that it was never going to end on Friday. Today even slowed it down more. He may say that, but just structurally, how do you get through? You have all day tomorrow, basically from 9 in the morning. In fact, audience, we will switch over to 11. But 9 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon, and 9 to 5 on Friday. How do you anticipate getting through everything else they have to get in basically 2 days and a couple hours?
Because there's only a few witnesses left. That was the way the judge started the day today, is he asked both sides, how many witnesses do you have left? Prosecution had to, defense had to. And the defense, too, the way they were titled as gun experts, didn't sound like it was going to take an entire day. So given that there are so few witnesses left, that would be the only way that they would be able to get done by Friday. And even with some of the holdup today, arguing over procedure, I still think that they're going to be able to do it. And remember, the judge keeps reminding them it's just a probable cause hearing, which tells me he is transmitting to them, we will be wrapping up this at Friday at 5 p.m. So I think we're going to get there.
I want to make sure the audience understands something, because people are so used to seeing procedurals on TV and movies and Perry Mason and all that for the aha moment. You're sitting here on this on the furry boyfriend, right? And they're laying out so much information and having to lay out so much information in a probable cause. How does both sides not know exactly the moves the other side's going to make after this is all over? Haven't they presented essentially everything in their roadmap? There may be a couple things they were able to keep hidden. But for instance, on this thing with the boyfriend, they're going into so much detail now about this. Wouldn't this be the type of thing they'd want to pop at a trial to get the jury to be more inclined to their side one way or the other?
That would be the way you'd see it on Perry Mason, wouldn't it? It would be a surprise at trial. But given the state of criminal law and due process and the rules of evidence, that wouldn't be the way that they would be allowed to do it. That's what prelims are for. They're not only for testing certain pieces of evidence, but have you seen with the Lance Twiggs testimony, with procedurally, how is it going to be admissible? How much is it going to be admissible? Are they going to sanitize it? In other words, are there some portions of his testimony that are too explosive or too irrelevant, where it would be overly prejudicial to actually allow that to get into the record? Only what's relevant and only what doesn't fail that test of prejudice versus probative value gets into the record. That's what the judge is doing today. So there can be no surprises at trial, even though I agree that's what many people in the public expect to see, because that's always the way it's portrayed.
When you say about the information, in that you just went through your checklist, bang, 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 on either autopsy or ballistics, and remember, I'm a civilian in this, on either autopsy or ballistics, has really overwhelming evidence been laid out that proves it one way or the other?
No, not overwhelming evidence. And one great example of that is the autopsy report was received in evidence, but we didn't see any of the photographs. We didn't hear from any doctors that described the wound. Thank God, because that would have been horrible for those friends, family members, and loved ones in the courtroom. But you don't need to have that at a probable cause hearing. But that's a great point, because that will be what you'll hear at trial. That will be the details that they'll go into at trial. In other words, they won't just enter in the autopsy report. You'll have somebody going through it line by line to determine not just the cause of death, manner of death, but then they'll tie that into the actual bullet that was fired, which of course will be tying back to Tyler Robinson. So too with the ballistics. It won't just be somebody testifying sort of generally about where was the gun found, the DNA on the trigger, which was Mrs. Robertson's. It's going to be all of the details as to how exactly they know that, where they found what. But you can't go into that type of detail at a prelim. Would never be done with it. And I know some people are thinking that that's what we're thinking about this prelim, but they're just making their record, testing the strength of the evidence, and they'll be done by Friday.
There are obviously intense interest and scrutiny on this. And there are some people that have put up and been on podcasts and put up alternative theories. And some people may call those conspiracy theories, and some of them may be a little out there. But you do have a large amount of the public, including the war room audience, that's just sitting there going, something doesn't feel right about this. They just don't. And I'm one of them. Just something not right about this. Yet, it appears that we're trying to be sold a narrative. Is that too harsh? You're a professional, and you see this all the time. Do you think this is pretty straightforward? So for those that are a little skeptical or feel like, particularly in some of the comments made afterwards, you're trying to be sold like an FBI narrative, or you're trying to be sold the established orders narrative, that is too harsh, and that actually the way you see it professionally, this has been going in a pretty professional manner?
Well, I think it's a great question, because I've heard and read all the same theories that you have. And a lot of people say, look at this kid. He's such a sharpshooter. He fired one bullet and was able to execute Charlie Kirk. I've heard that. I've seen that. The problem in a court of law is even if the judge has heard all of the same things, he can only deal with the evidence that is before him. And nobody's come forward with any evidence that there was another person involved in the shooting. Here's a video of somebody else doing it. Here's a video of a conspiracy between, 10 outsiders that influenced Tyler Robinson to do what he did. If that information were to come to light, you bet that both sides would brief it and argue it and litigate it in court. But unless and until something tangible comes of it, we're not going to see it in this courtroom, even though it continues to be discussed vociferously. I've read all the same things in the court of public opinion.
Do you think there's been enough probing, or maybe this is not the place for it, for the deep investigation of Tyler Robinson? Like, not just the motives of his, love affair with this furry, but other things, like when we went up there, I flew out there the day that Charlie was assassinated, and we set up shop there for 3 or 4 days. And actually I went around, I was kind of shocked, actually, given my knowledge of Utah, I was kind of shocked in Salt Lake City, particularly the amount of like gay pride flags out. And, they have these militias of these transgender ideology militia. I was a little shocked about how well developed that is. And there was a situation down in St. George's where one of these guys killed his entire family. Is there any evidence coming forward, or is this the time to get it out there that the FBI or state officials actually sat down and did a thorough investigation of any sources, any money, any involvement at all, any support for Robinson? Or is that assumed that it's not important if you've got a love note between him and the furry?
Yeah, I think the love note, the admission is front and center. That's the most important. In terms of what investigation was being done, you have to imagine behind the scenes that there was extensive investigation as to this defendant's ties to other individuals. Okay,
but hang on. Okay, you assume that. Where is that going to come out? Or is it not, who decides that's not relevant to even say, we looked at this, we went down this route, they do that in trial, or should that be done in this preliminary? Just if nothing more than the public can be assured that every stone was unturned to find out any potential involvement of anybody, any institution, any organization regarding the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
The frustrating thing about a court of law is they don't have to talk about everything they did or looked at. They have to talk about what they found that's relevant to the case. So, for example, in a case like this, they may have looked at all the social media they could. They may have talked to neighbors and friends, because remember, it is relevant why he committed the crime. Remember that Charlie Kirk was targeted, so his ideology in that sense was relevant. But that's probably the extent of it, because the judge has to see what's relevant to what I have in front of me in the charging document. And there's no charges or allegations regarding any kind of conspiracy. So that's what's frustrating about what we won't get to hear in a preliminary hearing or at trial. And that's the reason. And if something were to come to light, Steve, between now and the trial, then we would potentially not only be able to hear about it, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was, some additional hearing to decide how much of that was actually going to be admissible. And that hearing might be public too.
Can you hang on for a second, Wendy? Court is out. If they come back, we're going to cut right to it. But we are going to take a short commercial break. And I want to thank our sponsors who are very supportive of us doing it. We want to make sure that wall-to-wall coverage, you hear every minute and see everything that's going on in the courtroom, just like if you were sitting in the grand jury. I think it's very, very important. We believe we owe that to Charlie, but we owe it to the country.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it.
I got facts over tracks, isn't that? Spitting slow, spitting fast, I could roast, I could gas. Think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past. And the pettiness, a reflection of the emptiness. Hilarious, you think you're worth my time, you're delirious. Mysterious, because you are behind a fake exterior.
War Room. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Wendy, here's what I'm trying to get at. Jack Kennedy's murder. Jack Kennedy was a symbol for guys like my dad in that age, that greatest generation. Jack Kennedy was a war hero when he didn't have to be. He volunteered for some of the most dangerous, one of the most dangerous naval jobs in the positions, billets in the Pacific. His brother died as kind of a test pilot testing bombs over Europe. These were the best of the best. His smile, the way he carried himself, he just embodied that American spirit. And to be assassinated by a guy like Lee Harvey Oswald is one of the things that people, the prince in Camelot can't be assassinated by a guy like Lee Harvey Oswald, just a stone cold loser. It's the same thing here with Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk was the best of his generation. So many young men looked up to him. Charlie would go into the bear pit of these universities and take on all these tough questions, but do it with a smile and say, hey, come up to the front, like he did at the very moment he was being assassinated, being killed, with a smile on his face. Charlie Kirk could have been president of the United States one day. Charlie Kirk was kind of the Jack Kennedy of his era as far as representing the best of that generation. And to be killed, one of the engine room, one of our guys in the engine room texted me, said, Steve, I never thought I'd watch War Room and have you say the phrase gay furry lover. And I'm sitting there going, you're right. It's totally absurd. And not just that. These kids, two young men, are Mormons in Utah, which were presented as the most stable state in the Union, with the Mormon traditions and in the Mormon faith and the Mormon belief in family, and the assassin, the alleged assassin, looks like a normal everyday guy. It boggles the mind of what we're doing. We're sitting here about an assassination of arguably one of the greatest young men in his generation, and we're talking about gay furry lovers. I mean, we're through the looking glass. Nothing makes sense in this thing, ma'am.
Yeah, Charlie Kirk's assassination really changed the world. I agree with everything you said. He's one of a kind. He's somebody just that absolutely stands out in his generation. I was around the world afterwards and met people everywhere that weren't even Christians, that felt like they'd lost a family member, is the way they described it. You talk about the ripple effect. And then you're right, we're talking in court about some of these issues, and we're looking at Tyler Robinson. And not only does it not make sense, there's a great sense of injustice on so many levels that's magnified through remembering who Charlie Kirk was. And you're right, not only was he having that discussion when he was assassinated, the topic was gun violence. Talk about making it just extra tragic and ironic at the same time. But that's one of the reasons that you have so many people tuning into a trial like this and trying to figure out not only how do we make sense of it, but what should the consequences be? Everyone says, oh, we can't bring him back, but we can bring him justice. And that is also going to include justice for the Kirk family, for Erica Kirk, for Turning Point USA, for all those beloved friends, family, fans, and followers in the courtroom that waited since 1 a.m. to get a seat in the courtroom. That's one of the things that distinguishes this case, as well as the lack of a fan club for the defendant. Somebody asked me last hour about, well, remember Luigi Mangione had this big fan club. You don't see that kind of support for Tyler Robinson, do you?
Well, trust me, online, these people are purely evil. But I don't know. I equate this with Lee Harvey Oswald, that people could not grasp that Jack Kennedy was gunned down in broad daylight by someone like a Lee Harvey Oswald, just a total creep. And it's tough to understand that Charlie Kirk was gunned down, and we're having discussions about, what is gay furry and how does that mean as far as lovers go? I mean, it boggles the mind. And maybe you're saying, in a court of law, it's so limited for evidence. Maybe you need a broader inquiry just to make sure that that every rock has been unturned to make sure that anyone associated with this at all is brought to justice. Now, let me ask you the question about the trial. In your professional opinion, since this is an intricate chess match of laying foundational elements for moves that you're going to make a year from now, 5 or 6 in advance, have you seen any screw-ups by either the defense or the prosecution on this concept of foundation, where they're laying a foundation for evidence they're going to need later, ma'am?
Not yet. And that's because they are being so meticulous about everything they say and do. And you know who's partially to thank for that is this judge. Not only have they briefed this case to death, you pointed that out yesterday, they papered each other to death. Not only did the judge read everything that was filed, but every time he rules on the foundation that's necessary to introduce a specific piece of evidence, he goes back and forth, making sure both sides say everything they want to say. And then he articulates a long grounds and rationale for his ruling. That is the type of thing I expect him to do, not only between now and Friday, but on Friday, when he delivers his ruling, binding the case over for trial. Everybody knows that's where it's headed. He's heard enough, but he's really going to make sure that he articulates how all that evidence is admissible, because it's hard to screw up in front of a judge that's so meticulous in wanting to create that record. But you're right. That's what both sides are looking for. What do we see now that we can exploit 5 moves later?
And you're saying there's no doubt in your mind we're going to trial on this as you see it so far?
Unless there's some kind of a plea bargain, that would require extensive negotiation behind the scenes, and the prosecution would have to want to ever do that.
But do you see any assessment at all of the defense starting to weigh and measure that, where they would try to go in and cut a deal to say, hey, we'll plead guilty, but take the death penalty off the table? Do you see anything in the prosecution's case? Because that negotiation will take place in months, not now. But do you sense that will be given the evidence they're presenting and the foundational elements they're laying out, that the defense could be thinking about that even right now?
Yes, because the evidence is very strong and it's being established very strongly. And I as we go day by day, the defense is testing to make sure that the authentication is there, that the relevance is there. They're testing the evidence to ensure the case is as strong as it looks and sounds. And when they are convinced that it is, then they'll have that conversation with their client as to, if it's going to be easier to prove than maybe they thought before they got to prelim, is this something they want to bring up again? But Steve, the prosecution doesn't have to agree to that. That's up to them. They're going to talk to Erica Kirk. They're going to talk to the family. They're going to talk to everyone they need to make that decision. That's a collaborative decision between the family, the fans, the friends, the loved ones, and the state of the evidence, which up till now appears to be very solid.
Okay, Wendy, we're going to let you take a little break. They're obviously having a little longer break in the court. We'll let you take a break, and we'll get to you tomorrow morning when we're back.
All right, sounds good, Steve. Thank you.
Wendy, really want to thank you. You make things so clear for our audience. Such a great job you've done for all the RAV shows. It's ironic that so much of the controversy around Charlie and Charlie Kirk dealt with Israel and dealt with the war in the Middle East, right? Well, today, in the irony of ironies, we're back at it. And what Charlie Kirk tried to stop, which was a regime change war. I know that personally because I dealt with Charlie a lot on that very topic. So let's play a clip. We're back at it tonight on the 3rd day of the evidentiary hearing of Charlie Kirk. We're back at war in Iran. Let's go and play the clip.
Kind of covering all of the bases today. What else did he say?
Yeah, I think the way you put it, Brianna, mixed messages is exactly right. I think the one thing that is clear is that it's unclear what is next when it comes to Iran and what the president is thinking about how he wants to proceed. You mentioned some of those angry words from the president just earlier today, in the same day, hours earlier, saying that he believed the ceasefire was over, that the memorandum of understanding was over, just to later argue, no, we do not want to go back to full-out war. He also, at one point, saying that the ceasefire was over, in another breath, arguing that it really is up to the negotiators. He had a lot of praise for Steve Witkoff, for Jared Kushner, for the vice president. He said it's up to them to decide how they want to proceed. But obviously, the president is very frustrated, Brianna, with how things are going, particularly with these negotiations. He wants them to be farther along. The nuclear issue was one of the thorniest issues that was left to be settled in the 60-day period that they're currently in, if this memorandum of understanding is not over, as the president argued, that they needed to work out. And that's something that is, of course, causing some problems in these talks. One of the takeaways, though, that I really, I thought was a great question from that press conference was when a New York Times reporter got up and said, just a couple weeks ago, just last month, you were arguing that the negotiators were great people, that they're smart people, that they're rational people, and then today you're now calling them evil. not good to work with. What changed? And I believe we have a clip of what the president said then and what he is saying while he was in Turkey. Listen to both of that back to back.
And they were nice to deal with. They were strong people, smart people. I think actually they're smarter than the first and second group. But they're not radicalized, and they're, looking to help their country. You want to know the truth. They're scum. But they're bad people, very bad people. I think they're incompetent. I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum. You know what scum is? They're scum. They're sick people. As far as I'm concerned, it's just a waste of time dealing with them. They're liars. There's something wrong with them. They're cuckoo.
So as you see, Brianna, two different moments, two very different viewpoints on how things are going and the quality of the people that the United States is negotiating with when it comes to Tehran. The only other thing I would want to note is for what does come next. The president had said earlier in Turkey that he believed there could be more strikes on Iran tonight, obviously following the strikes we saw take place last night. But then later he seemed to soften that language. So it's really unclear at this point how they're looking at moving ahead. The one clear thing as well is just Trump is frustrated. He doesn't like how this is going, and he wants there to be more deal making, less talking, and less strikes.
Yeah, palpable frustration today during that appearance. The president also said, Elena, there was tremendous unity among NATO allies, but he also lashed out at various member countries at times. Which is it?
I mean, what a difference, Brianna, a day makes. I mean, just yesterday, there was a lot of tension, and I think it was unquestionable that many European allies were going into this NATO summit uneasy. They were unsure of how this was going to go. The president obviously has been very outspoken. He's made no secret of hiding the fact that he believes many of these NATO members are not paying what he argues is their fair share of defense spending. And you saw some of that kind of spill out yesterday, a little bit this morning. But you're right. When he came out to speak at this press conference, really concluding this visit, he said there was a lot of unity in the room. He made a point to argue that a lot of these different leaders had been coming up to him in private, telling them, "Sir, I love you." He said that kind of worked well with him. He did previously call out a number of different countries, Spain being one of them. Much softer language he was using during that press conference when it came to Spain. All to say, I think this was a successful summit for the overall alliance, particularly when you look at some of the things that Ukraine has gotten out of this, new commitments on Patriot defense missiles and things like that. So overall, I think European leaders leaving happy with how this went and how the president concluded on a happier note, arguing that there was unity and he was glad to have been there.
The Baltimore Engine Room has sent me the U.S. Central Command's statement, and it's backed up. And if we can put this video up, if you get to it, it's pretty. We're lighting some things up over there. Okay, this is U.S. Central Command, and I quote: "At the direction of the Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Central Command forces have started conducting additional strikes against Iran to further degrade their ability to threaten freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. The United States is holding Iran accountable for recent unjustified aggression against commercial shipping and civilian crews, navigating a vital international waterway." I think it's also incumbent that, we have another briefing from the Pentagon, and we go back to being the Department of War and not the Department of Wishful Thinking, and we just deal straight with this, because we've been told that not simply the Air Force and the Navy, but all missiles are gone, and it's obviously not the case. They still have the ability to deliver a punch, and deliver a punch against the countries in the Gulf itself, particularly Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, whatever you think of these countries, and I don't think much of them. They do control a big swath of the world's oil. This is why coming out of NATO also, I was very disappointed. I didn't see any, and maybe I missed it, and I will go back tonight and look, but I didn't see forcing them to step up, to have the NATO navies down there, with some commitments from the United States for Ukraine. These guys made commitments, and President Trump got them to going to 5% so they can start paying more for their defense, and we can start, downplaying it. But right now, to me, the Strait of Hormuz, the Red Sea, the Suez Canal, those are European problems or Asian problems. And people better start stepping up and sending their navies up there instead of us having to go back in and do, combat activity around Karg Island. combat activity around the Hormuz, and now actually they're talking about us, carving out our own waterway and have Navy escorts. That's not the role for the United States of America. This is a sideshow, given our strategic focus on hemispheric defense, which is absolutely urgent and very important, including in the Central Pacific. Now, the president was very complimentary of Xi. Now, he's got this state visit in late September in the burning heat of the midterms. Xi's coming here for a state visit. The president was very complimentary. We'll break all that down tomorrow, but the Chinese just gave us a love tap by testing a submarine launched ballistic missile right over the territory into the heart of where Cleo Pascal has been warning us for months and months and months, is an active participation of the Chinese Communist Party to trying to roll us back out of the Pacific. Now, Captain Fennell, to the degree that we have time, we're trying to get Captain Fennell on for either tomorrow or Friday to go all through that. It's quite a surprise to people. But the geopolitical situation in the rest of the world is quite tenuous, and we're still this opportunity cost of refocus. Now we've got, and look, the irony of ironies, it's on day 3 of Charlie Kirk's, the evidentiary hearing for Charlie Kirk. And Charlie Kirk's is central to the no regime change option of kind of the American right. Charlie Kirk was an absolute diehard believer in this, and really fought hard that we wouldn't get tangled up in a regime change. Number one, the politics of it. He knew it better than anybody, particularly since he had built a grassroots organization that focused on young people. And this is how he became a legend. This is how he became, kind of a mythic in his origin story about how he started this organization with nothing, because he had nothing. He started it with just his elbow grease and an idea that after we hired him at Breitbart to kind of write about college campuses, this is when the guy reached out to him after one of his articles, said, hey, what do you think about building an organization? He says, I got a whole idea for you. The guy put a little money in, and then Charlie, worked like crazy. The other thing about Charlie Kirk, remember, everything he started took a while to get traction. One of the great lessons of his life is the grit, determination, and stick-to-itiveness and just hard work. Besides the demeanor and humble, and he's a happy warrior, always laughing, got that smile all the time. You can even see that in the videos. After people are attacking him relentlessly, and that is hard to do. That comes from the heart and the spirit. That was the spirit of Charlie Kirk. And here we are. I can't get over it. I mean, the engine room texted me right away. As soon as I said, who would have thought, last September 9th, that 9 months later, we've been in a court of law going through a trial of evidentiary hearing for the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and you'd be talking about a gay furry lover of grown men in this nation in the 250th year of our revolution. Men who were given everything. These came from well-to-do, not wealthy, but middle-class folks. I think, in fact, the gay furry might have even been in better economic shape than Robinson. But Robinson didn't want for anything. In one of the most stable societies, at least on the surface, I think we're finding out a lot. I'm not saying the governor's number one issue was to keep the word Mormon out of this trial, but hey, just saying. There's so much here it doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. That's what we wanted to see. I mean, Rob, Sig, and Parker came to the same conclusion, Jack and all of us. I was adamant as they were that Real America's Voice, and right now we're in a recess as soon as it comes back in, but that the channel itself, the network itself, regardless of what anybody else did, and regardless of what the ratings were, if people didn't want to stick with it, that's fine. But we had an obligation, we had a duty to Charlie, a duty to the country, that if this was going to be kind of what they do in Utah as grand juries, that we were going to present you with the opportunity to sit in really judgment of this evidence and see it all, and then have during the day analysis by guys like Wendy Patrick, of course, Jack Posobiec's out there with Kevin Posobiec, We've got our first team out there as far as the production goes. I think the only of our top producers not there is Harry, who did such an amazing job over the 4th of July. But we've got a top team out there, and you're seeing it every second of it. It has to be. I said we have to do that for Charlie. People have to see everything from the time the gavel came down until the time the judge makes his decision. And then if there is a trial, we don't know that for sure. If there is a trial, we'll cover that wall to wall too, and we'll put our best team on it. And I think it's a very enlightening situation, but it is a trial. Remember, the investigation is not on trial. The evidence to get to a murder is on trial. That's one of the engine room people sent that to me. I think it's very wise. Want to thank really want to thank our sponsor for our sponsors who are bearing with us as we turn over massive amounts of broadcast time. I think this week we're going to be down to including Saturday, we'll probably be at 40% of the broadcast time. But really want to thank particularly people like Birch Gold, who've done such an extraordinary job. That Birch Gold, so go to birchgold.com. Make sure you get a copy. I'm now doing the graphics for the 9th free installment, which you're going to love. Because a little bit ties into, not totally, but it ties into the business model of the United States. And I think you have to think about the business model of the United States as you think about your own personal financial condition and situation. This is why we didn't want to people came to us to sell gold. I'm not interested in giving access or selling gold to our audience. I was interested in allowing people to understand and to find out why the dollar is a central backbone of the world's financial system, how it came about, what does it mean in the economic history of the United States, and what does that mean? What does fiat currency mean in regards to an asset like gold that was totally dismissed for, 100 years. Okay, I'm going to stop rambling, and we're going to go back to, it's kind of missed that. We're going to go back live to the courtroom right now. We're going to continue in the evidentiary hearing in the assassination, the matter of the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Also reviewing what Mr. Novak submitted, the redactions requested, and reviewing all parts of it in great detail. All right, I want to address the objections before me, and starting with Mr. Novak made a hearsay objection as it relates to Mr. McBride, and the court agrees, it is hearsay. At the same time, I'm only going to consider Mr. McBride's statements to provide context for the things that Lance Twiggs says and for their effects on Lance Twiggs. And as such, the hearsay objection as it relates to the statements of Mr. McBride in State's Exhibit 16 is overruled. Turning to relevance as it relates to State's Exhibit 16. And I agree in part and disagree in part as it relates to this objection. So there are portions of the transcript, or I say transcript, but what I really mean is State's Exhibit 16. And I appreciate the transcript. I found that to be helpful. It's a lot faster than trying to scroll. And so I appreciate that being provided. It was helpful to the court. And to be fair, I found it to be a true and accurate representation of the actual recording. So did I listen to every word and compare it? No, but from what I reviewed, I did not find any inconsistencies, just to put it on the record so there's no misunderstanding. But there are portions of the transcript, State's Exhibit 16, which relevance is still not clear to me. However, as the magistrate, I am able to distinguish between what is relevant to a probable cause determination and what is not. And what I take into consideration when I make my ultimate decision about probable cause, I will not take into consideration what is not relevant. So that is a constant balancing and evaluation I'm making throughout this hearing. And after this hearing, my intent is to review everything again, to be thorough. This is not a case where I'm going to be shooting from the hip. in making that determination, because this is an important determination. So I will take the necessary time as is required and is as necessary to ensure that the constitutional rights of all parties are upheld. So as I'm making determinations, where I land is pages 19 and 20 of the transcript, as it relates to State Exhibit 16, may contain irrelevant information, but I will reserve whether I consider those portions until I've heard the rest of the state's evidence. Therefore, as it relates to relevance, that ruling is reserved. Now, turning to the other objection, which is Rule 403, prejudice. As I am acting as a magistrate, I do not have the same concerns that my decision will be influenced by undue prejudice as that of a jury. Therefore, for purposes of admissibility, the defendant's objection is overruled. Even so, there are portions of this transcript, and again, State's Exhibit 16, that may not be admissible at trial and whose relevance I have not yet determined. In the abundance of caution and to protect the jury pool, the potential jury pool, from hearing potentially inadmissible evidence, I'm ordering that the audio cannot be published in the courtroom or on camera from page 19, timestamp 3255, until timestamp 3548. In other words, the state may publish the audio for all portions of the interview other than that one portion. And when I say audio, I mean audio and video, so both. I recognize there's approximately only 1 minute after 3548. The state can fast forward to that point for it's an approximate 1 minute and 12 seconds, or may take the time to redact the video as they see fit. So where I'm landing today is up until from the beginning until that page 19, 3255, that portion I am ruling is admissible and may be published. Again, if the state wishes that last minute and 12 seconds to be played, they can either take the time tonight to redact what the court is not going to allow to be published. And I wish to differentiate. I'm considering it all. But for publication purposes, that portion is not going to be permitted to be played in the courtroom.
Your Honor, would you state those times again that you are ordering not to be published? I've got 3255 to 3548.
Right. Those are the two timestamps for that. And I hope that's helpful as both parties are trying to review on the transcript and State's Exhibit 16.
And that's from 3255 to 3548.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Is not publishable in the courtroom or on to be broadcast. Finally, I want to recognize both parties wanted the benefit of the record to be more specific in their arguments concerning their objections. So if those arguments pertain to timestamp 3255 through timestamp 3548, I'm willing to allow you to do that in a closed hearing. Please be mindful of the time and keep your argument succinct. With that in mind, do the parties have any arguments they feel I have not considered in my ruling that require a closed hearing?
Yes, Your Honor. And so I'm just going to tell the court what I think the general nature of that is without getting into the details, because
Sure.
I do think a closed hearing is appropriate. Setting aside the 1102 issue and objections, there are statements in this video by Mr. Twiggs attributed to Mr. Robinson. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mr. Robinson said. There are two other exhibits, which I've said before, I'm confident the state will offer, which Mr. Twiggs says in this video, those are statements by Mr. Robinson. Okay? I will acknowledge that separate and apart from 1102, the statements of a party opponent are admissible if relevant. In fact, they're not even hearsay, right? They're excluded from the hearsay rule. But the question is whether statements of Mr. Robinson of the nature that I'm referring to can be published, not considered by the court, but published without violating Mr. Robinson's 14th Amendment due process rights. And it is our view, as we have said in our earlier papers, that the answer is no. Publication, especially on in the way this proceeding is being published, would violate Mr. Robinson's due process rights under the 14th Amendment. We previously cited, and the reason why I'm saying this again is not to reiterate something just because if you say it twice, it means something different, but because my colleagues have suggested that maybe my argument earlier was not clear enough. And so I want to make sure it is clear so that the court makes a decision based on the arguments of counsel. The United States Supreme Court said in Estes, E-S-T-E-S versus Texas, 381 U.S. 532, the following. In Rideau versus Louisiana, and that's R-I-D-E-A-U, this court constructed a rule that the televising of a defendant in the act of confessing to a crime was inherently invalid under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, even without a showing of prejudice or a demonstration of the nexus between the televised confession and the trial. I am not calling the statements of Mr. Robinson confessions, but that is what the state will call them. And so there are portions of this exhibit and the other exhibits that I've referred to which implicate Mr. Robinson's right not to have what the state calls a confession televised. This court has authorized the televising of this proceeding. And there are reporters in this courtroom who will go outside and speak on what we used to call television. That opinion was from the 60s. Now we have other forms of technology, but I'm just going to use what the Supreme Court says because it's the Supreme Court. So we are very concerned that the publication beyond this court's eyes of what the state will call confessions at trial violates Mr. Robinson's due process rights right here and now today. And I know that we said that before in the litigation, but now we're exhibit specific. If I haven't been clear about the argument, I want to make sure I'm clear about it because the court's decision to allow this video to be televised and the other two exhibits to be shown to the camera in the back of the courtroom is exactly what the Supreme Court says violates the 14th Amendment.
So, and I appreciate that clarity, and perhaps, again, if you want to go into closed hearing, we can do so, or if you want to refer to the pages. So I want to know exactly what you're referring to, whether it's in that 3255 through 3548, which is being excluded, or is it in the
It is not. It is earlier, and it's also the two other anticipated exhibits. So we may as well deal with all of it at the same time. It's probably easier to do it in a closed proceeding because nobody has to be obtuse. I don't have to be obtuse in order to protect my client's rights.
No, I appreciate that. And it actually prompts, in order for me to get to that, I do want to ask the state, are you intending to introduce the text messages as an exhibit in this proceeding, the preliminary hearing?
Yes, Judge, we will be attempting to and moving for the admission of the text thread, the Discord thread, and I think, and the note that is referenced in Mr. Twiggs 1102.
All right, and let me take one step at a time, just for clarity. And again, Mr. Novak, I really do appreciate you being so precise. It's helping me parse it out so we can address it, because it's important, and I recognize that you're advocating for your client, and so I want to give it its due time. The text messages, from my understanding, and either side weigh in, my understanding that those were released to the public months ago in their entirety.
Judge, if I may, they were not released in their entirety. Portions of them were placed into the charging document, the information that supported, in part, the charges that the state has filed. We did not put the entirety of them in. And now we wish to publish more of them than were included in the charging document.
I see. For some reason, I thought it was as part of an exhibit for a motion, but Mr. Novak, I'm not sure if that's ringing any bells.
I'm aware of the issue that the court is commenting on. I think the state needs to account for its decision to publish text messages that directly implicate the Supreme Court law that we're talking about. And I don't want to pretend that I can anticipate what the court's concerns are, but that doesn't cure republication on television of what the state will call a confession in this proceeding. So in other words, this is not like, oh, the cat's out of the bag or the barn door's open. This is another opportunity to violate Mr. Robinson's constitutional rights. And I'm not at all suggesting that somebody is intending to do that, certainly not the court, and I'm confident that the state's counsel would never intend to do that, but that would be the consequence of further televising what the state refers to as, previously referred to as confessions, and certainly would refer to here in this proceeding as confessions. We are so acknowledging that they are statements of a party. We have not filed anything in this case that publicizes the text messages, the Discord chat, the note which Ms. Hunt is mentioning, and now that Ms. Hunt has said that, yes, we want this note to be presented into evidence, and the court knows what this note is because the court's now watched the video. That's another piece of the same problem. So this is all simplified by the court being extra cautious about Mr. Robinson's constitutional rights, considering these exhibits to the extent the court deems that they're admissible and portions of them are relevant, and not further televising them in this proceeding in a manner which we think is inconsistent with what the Supreme Court said in Estes v. Texas.
All right. I appreciate that, Mr. Novak. Ms. Hunt, would you like to respond? Because I understand what Mr. Novak's saying, and there may be a 403 issue as well as it relates to this, and I'm not going to pretend to read your mind, but because I can't do that. All right, Ms. Hunt.
Just to clarify for the record in the court, the state's position is that we would like the audio played. The audio may be captured by the cameras in the state's position, but we never intended to visually put them on the monitors such that cameras can capture them and pause or get the actual exhibits, substances of the exhibits. I believe that was the media's position, if I remember correctly, is that they want everything audio and visually displayed, but the state's position is we just want the audio played.
Right, but what's it? So I'm just focused on 16 right now.
Okay, yes, and that's the state's position with regards to Exhibit 16.
All right, so help me understand, what's the difference if the audio's played or the video's played on what the court is identifying is, well, first of all, 16 is admitted, so that threshold has been met, but we're dealing with the publication in regards to what is publicized, because this is going to Mr. Novak's argument about publicizing that is different than the court simply reviewing it in its own privacy. I don't want to misstate your argument, but I believe that was one of the distinctions you made.
The distinction that Ms. Hunt is drawing is, I think, what people call a distinction without a difference. It doesn't matter whether it's audio or video, and it doesn't matter whether it's on a television or on the internet or on the radio. It's going to be broadcast. And so it doesn't really matter whether it's audio or video. And it's actually not Mr. Robinson's video, it's Mr. Twiggs' video. And when the court mentioned 403, yes, I think the court did accurately read my mind, which is fine with me, but it's unfair prejudice of a constitutional dimension, and 403 is a rule of evidence.
All right, so Ms. Hunt, as it relates to that publication, help me understand whether it's audio or video. What's the difference there? Help me understand that.
I disagree that it's a distinction without a difference. As we've discussed prior in this hearing, UCJA Rule 4-202.02 sub 2 sub J states that exhibits are presumed to be public court records, and it does give the court discretion to regulate access when necessary to protect the integrity of the exhibit or ensure a fair trial. So I do want to recognize that. But that discretion should be exercised narrowly, as we've talked about before with publication regarding this case. What the state is proposing, we believe, is a narrowly tailored accommodation. We don't want to display the full exhibits. Obviously, within State's Exhibit 16, the video of Lance Twiggs, he is shown, and it can be seen, exhibits that the state will then in the future move to admit 16.1, 16.2, the text threads, the Discord threads. So we're thinking that if it's displayed visually, what the cameras will be able to do is pause that, duplicate them, replicate them, essentially have access to those exhibits. What we're trying to do, and maybe they can do the same thing with I'm sure Mr. Novak will say they'll do the same thing with audio. But hearing the tone, the context, all of that, that's why the state chose to do, we could have done a written 1102 statement from Mr. Twiggs. We chose to do, as is allowed by 1102, we chose to do a recording.